Hello, everyone. Back again with Hope and Resiliency, the Understanding Psychotherapeutic Strategies of Milton H. Erickson. This is chapter 10. We're still in the list of strategies that Milton Erickson is said to have used. I still don't think they were as mechanical as reading them in order makes it seem. He just acted very fluidly and in the moment. This is called suggestion, and here's a case report. I'm skipping around. I'm doing little sections and longer sections, and enough to get the idea, get examples. So, case report: the boy with asthma. Erickson was brought a 12-year-old boy who suffered from chronic asthma. The boy had to have an inhaler with him at all times. As Erickson began speaking with the boy, he noticed the number of times the boy reached for his inhaler so that he could breathe comfortably. The boy was obviously anxious, so Erickson asked sympathetically, "How much fear do you have of asthma? How intense is this fear?" Erickson listened quietly without making any attempt to assure the boy. Instead, he had him elaborate on his subjective experiences of asthma. "How important are your fears of arrested breathing?" The boy responded with noticeable relief. This was the first time anybody had ever wanted to listen to a full account of his fears about death and of arrested breathing. The boy became absorbed in conversation with Erickson. He explained in full detail his fear of suddenly becoming unable to breathe. He described the horrible feeling of constriction in his chest and the awful visions of death that came to him. In telling his story, he became so fascinated by at least having a good listener that he began breathing more comfortably. When Erickson felt that the boy was ready to accept the suggestion, he pointed out, talking about your fear makes it easier for you to breathe." The boy acknowledged that this was true. So Erickson continued, "I would like to have you understand that some of your asthma is caused by fear and some of it comes from the pollen. You take the medication that you do in order to deal with the part of the asthma that is caused by pollen. Now, let us say that you currently have 100% asthma. If I reduce that asthma by 1%, you won't notice the change. But your asthma would be 1% less." Next, Erickson speculated, suppose I reduce the asthma by 2%, 5%, or 10%. You still wouldn't notice the change, but it would have been reduced." Erickson spoke in such a way as to get the boy curious about the idea of reducing the asthma by some unspecified amount. He then engaged the boy in a debate over just how much of the asthma he was going to keep. Is it going to be 5%, or 10%, or 20%, or 30%, 40%? The boy decided, "I think it is 20% of the asthma that comes from the pollen." This gave him the freedom to use his inhaler 80% less than before. That's it. Quote, "Know that I and thou in the disease are three factors mutually antagonistic. If thou wilt side with me, not neglecting what I enjoin on thee, and refraining from such things as I shall forbid thee, then we shall be 2 against 1, and will overcome the disease." An unnamed physician, circa 1200 Common Era. The use of suggestion in healing has existed since antiquity. Ancient Greeks and Egyptians and Oriental cultures are known to have used rituals to elicit behavioral responses outside the normal realm of conscious control. These included, among other things, the curing of disease. As would be expected, the dramatic results achieved through suggestion have time and again inspired both profound respect and intense mistrust. In the current culture, It is not uncommon for critics to dismiss clinical techniques of suggestion as being insincere or overly manipulative. Before becoming comfortable with the use of suggestion in therapy, the clinician must first come to terms with the loneliness and desperation associated with intractable suffering. From this perspective, it is easier to appreciate the essential function of clinical suggestion, which is to help the patient accomplish a goal that consciously he cannot reach alone. In 1994, members of the North Texas Society for Clinical Hypnosis had the opportunity to listen to an accomplished general surgeon, Dabney Ewing, lecture on his work with industrial burn victims. In an interview conducted 2 years later, Ewing explained, quote, "When I started using hypnosis with burn victims, I was convinced at first that the burns simply were not as severe as I had originally diagnosed. But shortly thereafter, I treated a patient whose leg had slipped into molten metal at an aluminum plant. Using hypnosis, I had him become cool and comfortable a half hour after his burn, and when he got out of the hospital in 18 days without a skin graft and without narcotics, I became a true believer." Ewing, 1996, page 18. At the lecture in Dallas, after watching an intriguing series of slides documenting the uses of suggestion for providing relief from pain, reducing inflammation, speeding up recovery, and reducing the severity of scarring, a member of the audience suddenly asked, "What is your method of hypnotic induction?" Ewing replied, "I typically meet my patients at the door of the ER. They come in strapped to a gurney and packed in ice. I tell them I am a doctor and emphatically ask if they know how to stop their pain. When they say no, I tell them that I do. Then I ask if they were willing to do everything I ask. When they say yes, I tell them to feel cool all over their body and to keep on feeling cool as they are wheeled into their room." Ewing pointed out that this is not such an extraordinary suggestion because the patient is already packed in ice. Yet typically with the supplemental use of suggestion, much less pain medication is required and healing is greatly facilitated. Ewing, 1996. This acceptance of what the patient knows he cannot do and the offering of hope through direct suggestion gives the patient a needed ally in dealing with his pain and fear. During the last century, the therapeutic use of suggestion has been closely associated with the practice of hypnosis. In 1842, James Braid introduced the terms hypnotism and hypnosis from the Greek hypnos, sleep, to describe a special state of consciousness that he believed was associated with heightened responsiveness to suggestion. 40 years later, Hippolyte Bernheim would identify suggestion as the sole operative force in hypnotism. Hughes and Rothavius, 1996. In modern times, most people agree that hypnotic results are achieved by means of suggestion. A general definition purposed by Weitzenhofer, 1989, describes hypnotism as a form of influence by one person exerted on another through the medium or agency of suggestion. Page 13. As one of the originators of the modern practice hypnosis, Braid emphasized the importance of hypnotic induction by using a shiny object to produce eye fatigue. At this time, sleep was believed to play a central role in suggestibility. Braid proposed that, quote, "the patient must be made to understand that he is to keep the eyes steadily fixed on the object and the mind riveted on the idea of that one object." Hughes and Rothavius, 1996. Bernheim later recognized that therapeutic suggestion does not necessarily require induction into hypnotic sleep to be effective. This discovery in the 19th century by Bernheim anticipated the general use of suggestion in psychotherapy, a form of therapy that had yet to be invented by 20th century psychotherapists. As a college student, Erickson essentially accepted the Freudian explanation of hypnosis, but would soon downplay the importance of external objects and formal induction rituals. He instead placed great emphasis on the fixation of attention on a single idea. Erickson clarified his unique and clinical approach to suggestion, stating that, quote, innumerable times this author has been asked to commit to print in detail the hypnotic technique he has employed to alleviate intolerable pain or to correct various other problems. The verbal replies made to these many requests have never seemed to be adequate, since they were invariably prefaced by the earnest assertion that the technique in itself serves no other purpose than that of securing and fixing the attention of the patients, creating then a receptive and responsive mental state, and thereby enabling them to benefit from unrealized or only partially realized potentials for behavior of various types. With this achieved by the hypnotic technique, there is then the opportunity to proper suggestions and instructions serving to aid and to direct patients in achieving their desired goal or goals. In other words, the hypnotic technique serves only to induce a favorable setting in which to instruct patients in a more advantageous use of their own potentials of behavior. That's Erickson, 1966 and 2001. The person who originated, before attempting an in-depth study of Erickson's use of suggestion, it is important to recognize that while the concept of suggestion is indispensable to the theory of hypnosis, the use of suggestion is not limited to formal procedures of hypnosis. Case report called The Woman Who Was Going to Slap Erickson. This is under a section called Cooperation versus Control. A young woman walked into Erickson's office and glared at him. Her husband had arranged the appointment. Erickson greeted her by saying, "Your husband has told me that if I say a single wrong word here, that you will slap my face and walk out." Erickson continued with an earnest tone, "There is just one thing puzzling me. I don't know which way to duck. Are you right or left-handed?" Startled, she looked at Erickson. Quote, "Maybe you won't say the wrong thing," she said. Erickson acknowledged her statement. "Maybe I won't." But then he added, "Well, you are my height. You are very nicely built. You weigh quite a bit less than I do, and I'm not very heavy. You are as tall as I am. But nonetheless, you could really swing. So are you right or left-handed?" She replied, "Right-handed." From that point forward, Erickson was able to gather further information about her therapeutic needs without being slapped. Erickson, 1962. Above all else, it should be recognized that Erickson's strategic use of suggestion was not for purposes of control, but rather as a means of collecting and guiding the patient's expenditure of energy. Using hypnosis to facilitate an intense inward focus of attention, Erickson would then guide the patient to a confident and sustained recognition of his or her own potential for healing. An analogy for this approach to healing can be seen in the riddle. How do you start a daytime fire using only what is found in the air? The strategic use of suggestion can produce some stunning results. When seemingly improbable outcomes are associated with the actions of an authority figure, it is not surprising that the illusion of control exists. As described by Erickson, by acceptance of and response to suggestions, the patient can become psychologically deaf, blind, hallucinate, amnesic, anesthetic, or dissociated, or he can develop various in the given situation. Erickson, 1961 and 2001. Furthermore, Erickson insisted that all hypnotic behaviors are naturally occurring phenomena. For example, many sports enthusiasts become psychologically deaf anytime a football game is on TV. After one has watched a very scary movie, it's not difficult to hallucinate a sight or sound associated with some of the fright produced by the film. Almost everyone has had the experience of being introduced to a person and then 5 seconds later becoming amnesic to the person's name. While cautioning against the use of hypnosis to satisfy fantasies of control, Erickson warns, quote, failures in hypnotic experimentation and therapy often derive from treating the subject as an automaton, expected to execute commands in accord with the hypnotist's understanding, rather than as a personality with individual patterns of response and behavior. Although hypnotists sometimes use challenge suggestions to heighten the patient's expectation of achieving profound clinical results, the outcome is still a product of cooperation. Direct suggestion within the chapter called Suggestion. Direct suggestion. Case report. The mother's unconscious use of direct suggestion. I, Dan Short, was talking about hypnosis with a social worker. By the way, Dan Short is one of the authors of this, a cohort of Erickson. I was talking about hypnosis with a social worker when she recalled, quote, I almost got to witness hypnosis firsthand, but I had to cancel the appointment at the very last minute. It was really embarrassing. Intrigued, I asked her to explain. She had been trying to get a large wart removed from her son's hand, but the pediatrician was unsuccessful in his efforts to remove it. Each time it was treated, the wart reappeared, larger in size. As a last resort, the mother was told to try taking her son to a hypnotist. As she explained, my son was just 8. I did not want him to be frightened by what was about to happen. So each night before bed, I told my son that a nice person was going to talk with him on Saturday to make his wart disappear. We were counting down the days until Saturday, when he was supposed to have his appointment. But when I got him out of bed Saturday morning, the wart was gone. Many years later, she was still baffled. My response was, you did not get to watch someone else conduct hypnosis on your son. You did it yourself. She still looked puzzled, so I explained, you failed to mention that he should wait until after he saw the man on Saturday to lose his wart. Erickson defined suggestion generally as the communication of ideas. Although he did not provide a precise definition of direct suggestion, he seemed to use the term to refer to the classical use of hypnotic suggestion. While using traditional approaches to suggestion, ideas are communicated in a linguistic style that is easily evaluated by conscious processes. Direct suggestions usually take on the form of an injunction that clearly originates from some external source. People in general are vulnerable to the verbal influence of others, and sometimes to a greater extent than is realized. As a patient once commented to Dan Short, quote, it is amazing that you find yourself able to do after someone really tells you to do it. When I went to Army boot camp, I was not physically capable of doing more than 10 push-ups. After smarting off at the drill sergeant, I suddenly found myself outside in the rain doing 100 push-ups over a mud puddle. With him screaming at me, I was suddenly able to do far more push-ups than before. This was a patient who had an extremely harsh and authoritative father. From a young age, he had been programmed to respond to an external locus of control. This was his preference in therapy as well. He was annoyed by other therapists who merely sat and listened. He wanted a therapist who would tell him what to do about his current situation. Indirect suggestion in this chapter called Suggestion. Case report, The Tale of Two Trees. Unfortunately, Erickson was not able to outlive all of the patients who came to him for care. In the final years of his life, Erickson was very involved in preparing his patients, family and friends for his eventual departure. He knew that it was especially important to make provisions for those who were chronically mentally ill, those who had become dependent on therapy in order to live independently. Occasionally, some patients benefit from a lifelong relationship with a single therapist. One such person, John, had begun therapy with Erickson in the early 1960s. He was schizophrenic, diagnosed as schizophrenic, and had a trust fund established by his family that allowed him to live independently. When driving became difficult for John, Erickson helped him find an apartment within walking distance of his home office, Erickson's home office. From the very start, John became especially attached to Erickson. John was a kind and faithful person whom Erickson enjoyed having in his home. A great deal of therapy was achieved with John. One of Erickson's methods was to simultaneously position himself as a powerful authority figure and as one who was one down in relation to the patient's ability. When Erickson decided that John should learn how to be responsible and care for others, he sent him to the pound to get a dog. John's apartment was too small for a dog, so Erickson offered to give John's dog, Barney, a home. John came to the Erickson house twice a day to feed and care for Barney. The dog allegedly wore a series of limericks about his relationship. The dog allegedly wrote a series of limericks about his relationship with John and about the old codger, and how he was terrorized by the sight of his wheelchair and honking horn. Erickson's wheelchair had a honking horn. It was clearly John who became the dog's hero. Erickson and this patient especially enjoyed spending time together outside. A few years before he died, Erickson and John planted 2 trees in the backyard. It was the beginning of a friendly competition to see whose tree grew stronger and taller. Several months after Erickson's death, the patient's tree began to wither and die. By this time, the patient had become a dear family friend and a relationship that continues to this day, 2005 when this book was written. When Mrs. Erickson knew about the tree competition and was concerned about the effect that the dying of John's tree might have on him. So she offered to get the weaker tree some help. Let's have a specialist examine your tree. John was initially befuddled, but then explained, that is Dr. Erickson's tree. Right after we planted them, Dr. Erickson decided that he wanted my tree, so we traded. With pride, he pointed to the other tree. My tree's doing fine. It always has. Those who knew Erickson recognized him as the undisputed master of indirect communication. Erickson's interest in the use of indirect suggestion dates back to when he first began to study hypnosis in college. However, he waited until after receiving his doctoral degree to begin his formal research study with indirect and permissive hypnotic induction. That's Erickson, 1964 and 2001. As he continued to use indirect suggestion throughout his career, it provided the rationale behind his use of metaphor and stories, his multi-level use of language, and his skillful utilization of nonverbal communication. This style of communication is difficult to define. The term indirect suggestion has an implied meaning that covers nearly everything other than explicit commands. With both direct and indirect suggestion, ideas can be communicated through language, through nonverbal communication, or symbolic acts. The difference is that with the use of indirect suggestion, the desired outcome is not made explicit for conscious review. A direct suggestion, sit in the chair, is made indirect by use of implication. After a while, you might find that you grow tired of standing. You might want to sit in a chair. Or by asking a question, would you like to have a seat? Or by association, my patients generally sit in that chair there. Or by very broad statements of tact. At some point, you're probably going to want to sit down. Another method would be to say nothing while catching the client's gaze and then looking over at the empty chair. Yet another method would be to move the chair slightly toward the client with one's toe. The variety of ways to communicate something indirectly is virtually unlimited. Another good means of delivering an indirect suggestion is by asking a question. This is especially useful in hypnosis because it automatically focuses patients' attention inward so that they can search for an answer. When you ask the patient, "How much time do you think we will need to pass before you allow yourself to see you progress?" It produces a need to find an answer, so less energy is available to reject their suggestion that progress will be achieved. In addition to these types of remarks, Erickson would often ask questions that would not be answered entirely by conscious processes. "Would you like to go into trance now or in a few minutes?" It is evident that the answer to this question presupposes the idea that the patient will go into a trance. What is less evident is the larger implication. If healing is achieved by means of trance and the patient goes into a trance, then is he bound to heal? Case report, the regulated diet. This is the section called permissive suggestion, the regulated diet. Erickson's help was requested by the parents of 3 seriously underweight children. The parents were putting a great deal of effort into the children's health. The mother explained to Erickson that she always had a perfectly balanced diet for them. Her nutritional regime was comprehensive and covered everything from each of the major food groups. She had the proper foods for breakfast, the proper foods for lunch, and the proper food for dinner. She wanted the children to achieve a healthy diet by conforming to her understanding of what they should eat, and when they should eat, and how they should eat it. Erickson explained to the well-intentioned parents, "The problem is to teach the children to enjoy eating food." He felt the children must learn how to enjoy satisfying their hunger. Therefore, Erickson made it clear to the parents that they should not try to force a specific diet on their children. Erickson wanted the parents to tell the children that they would stop trying to interfere with their eating. The only requirement of the children was that they come to the table at the appointed time 3 times a day. The children were to be told that they could help themselves to whatever their mother placed on the table. In order to meet the personality needs of the mother, Erickson told her, "You want a balanced diet. All right, let's go into training on this. Make a record of what Johnny eats. Make a record of what Willie eats. And make a record of what Annie eats for each meal. At the end of the month, add it up." A month later, the mother came back and reported that the children had balanced their diets and gained weight. One of them started out and ate nothing but lettuce all day. On another day, he ate nothing but meat. On another day, he ate nothing but bread. As Erickson explains, the children really went wild getting a sense of freedom. And with this freedom came the opportunity to learn more about the dictates in their body's hunger. Erickson, 1958. Quote by Blaise Pascal, "We are generally the better persuaded by the reasons we discover ourselves than by those given to us by others." We are generally the better persuaded by the reasons we discover ourselves than by those given to us by others. Blaise Pascal, 1623 to 1662. We see in Erickson's work a deep respect for the innate abilities of each individual. This is especially true in his conceptualization of permissive suggestion. That's enough for suggestion. That's a lot. Gives you an idea. You students that are watching this are probably all in undergraduate psychology course. So just want to give you a preview, a taste of the future, a taste of the now, maybe for as you begin absorbing and thinking about these kind of things, using things for yourself or for your own self-development, refinement, clarification. I still repeat and say from my own experience these last 45 years, and in my work with people over, I don't know, 30 years. Effectiveness comes with people, comes from me getting myself clear of the debris, the societal conditioning around my spirit, because spirit, energy, pneuma, breath is what and who I am. It is what I am. I get to choose who I am, just like you do, just like everyone who you know and with whom you work. So respecting people's innate abilities and innate capacity and innate knowledge, like Erickson does, and that is actually almost a quote verbatim, almost straight out of Taoistic teaching, which is 8 or 10,000 years and growing. So hope that's helpful, and I'll continue to do this as long as possible, and I'm enjoying it, and hopefully it'll continue to get even better, more effective, and see new ways to do things and be more helpful. So thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.